We have a great group of members who are here, and everybody's got a lot of different commitments this morning. We also are very eager to hear from our witnesses and talk about a critical issue facing our country. It's really a crisis in our communities, and it's getting worse, not better. And the crisis is this opioid epidemic. Our country is being gripped by it. My state is, the states of every senator around the table is. It's a crisis that doesn't discriminate. It's in every corner of my state. Earlier this month, a police officer named Chris Green in East Liverpool, Ohio, had a near-fatal fentanyl overdose following a routine traffic stop. He went up to a car for a routine stop and noticed there was white powder spread around the car. He did the right things. He put on his mask, put on his gloves, arrested some individuals, went back to the police station, and noticed that on his shirt there was some powder. So he reached up like this and brushed the powder off his shirt. This guy's 6'3", 225 pounds, big man, and he fell to the floor unconscious and overdosed. They administered Narcan immediately, but it wasn't enough. They had to rush him to the hospital where 2 more Narcan doses were administered, and luckily his life was saved. As his police chief said, he would have died had he been alone. Police chief also said, what if he'd gone home with that powder on his shirt and hugged his kid? So that's just an example of what we're facing. It's obviously devastating our communities and families, but also creating quite a danger for our law enforcement and other first responders. Fentanyl is 30 to 50 times more powerful than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine, and a lethal dose can be as little as 2 milligrams. We had some floor speeches this week about it. We were able to show just a tiny amount of fentanyl that can be deadly. We also know about U4 and carfentanil and other synthetic drugs that are coming into our country. This issue is getting worse. As I said, the number of overdoses and deaths have increased dramatically. Earlier this month, you may have seen the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, our former colleague, actually included synthetic opioids in his worldwide threat assessment. And he noted in his comments that deaths have increased 73% just between 2014 and 2015, the last year for which they have records. So sadly, that death toll continues to climb, and we'll hear about that this morning. In one county in Ohio, for instance, fentanyl was responsible for 394 overdose deaths in 2016. One county. Tom Gilson, you'll hear from later, the Cuyahoga medical examiner. He will tell you he's projecting 581 fentanyl-related deaths out of 850 total fatal drug overdoses this year. In other words, fentanyl is by far our biggest killer. A lot of these are deaths due to mixing fentanyl with heroin and other drugs, leaving the user with no idea what they're taking. An example of this is a new opioid cocktail called Gray Death. Gray Death includes a mixture of heroin, fentanyl, carfentanil, U4770. Heroin's the weakest drug in that mix. Think about that. This is available on the street, this opioid cocktail, for as little as $10 to $20. So even though these drugs are selling very inexpensively, fentanyl has an extremely high profit margin, making it very appealing to the drug dealer. The DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, estimates that a kilogram of fentanyl can be purchased from a Chinese supplier for a few $1,000s. A kilogram for a few $1,000s can be used to make hundreds of thousands of pills with profits in the millions. So bottom line, we need to stop this flow of illegal, illicit fentanyl. And unbelievably, it comes through the U.S. mail system. This is a shock to many of my constituents and others who are learning about this. While some of this fentanyl is smuggled into the United States from Mexico and Canada, primarily it comes directly into the United States. And according to law enforcement, including some folks who were here this morning who will tell us about this, it primarily comes from one place, which is China. It's produced in laboratories there, and our understanding from law enforcement is that most of that fentanyl produced in China is intended for export to one place, and that's the United States of America. There are a number of Chinese websites ready to ship. Do a Google search for fentanyl for sale. It produces a number of websites where the drug and many others appear to be readily available. On one website, you can purchase a gram of fentanyl for $250, but it says the more you buy, the less you pay, offering discounts for larger volumes. To ease any concern about whether the purchaser would receive his order, the website guarantees discreet shipment, quote, with undetectable and careful packaging. While shipment was available in a number of countries, the website knew its audience and offered express delivery to the United States. Many of these websites are so sure that their seizure will not be stopped by law enforcement that they'll guarantee you that if the original somehow gets lost or seized, they'll send you another one for free. Several websites we reviewed made it clear that they exclusively used Express Mail Service, or EMS, as their courier. EMS, of course, is the International Postal Service offered by members of the Universal Postal Union, or UPU. Packages delivered through EMS are passed to the United States Postal Service as they enter the United States. So look, our shared goal today is to try to stop these drugs from exploiting our own streams of mail into our country. And every member around this dais this morning has been involved in this issue on prevention and education, on treatment and recovery. We've actually passed 2 significant new legislative initiatives in the last year in this Congress focused on this issue. We understand it's much broader than just interdicting, but we've got to do a better job of interdicting. Following 9/11, Congress identified weaknesses in international shipping standards as a significant problem and made clear that requiring advanced electronic data would make our country safer. This was 15 years ago. When Congress first legislated, it did so, however, that left a gaping loophole. The Trade Act of 2002 mandated that commercial carriers provide advanced electronic data that could be used to identify certain packages being shipped in the United States. In that 2002 legislation, Congress asked the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Postmaster General to decide if the Postal Service should be subject to the same requirements that they were putting in place for all private carriers. To date, no determination has been made, and our country is less safe as a result. As such, the difference between the information that private commercial carriers are required to provide is very different than from the Postal Service, but both serve the same function, delivering packages into our communities. At the same time, the Postal Service handles a much higher volume of international packages than the commercial carriers combined. Prior to any shipment arriving in the United States, commercial carriers are required to electronically provide data to law enforcement, including Customs and Border Protection, with the basic information, including what the shipper name and address is, the name and address of the person receiving the package, a description of the contents, the piece count, the weight, and the value of the contents. This information is then transmitted to Customs and Border Protection and 47 other federal agencies at the National Targeting Center. Based on this information, CPB then targets suspect shipments for additional scrutiny and selects the packages it wants to inspect when they arrive in the United States. Commercial carriers are also charged $1 per package by CPB, which most commercial carriers pass on to the shipper. None of this applies to the Postal Service, and the Postal Service handles hundreds of thousands of packages every day. All international packages shipped through the Postal Service are routed through 5 international service centers, with New York Center at JFK Airport receiving the overwhelming majority of those packages. How these packages are processed is completely different at each of these centers. For the most part, CPB is tasked with identifying packages or shipments it wants to inspect, and the Post Service locates those packages or shipments and presents them to CPB. However, it isn't that easy. Due to the hundreds of thousands of packages, the Postal Service is left to manually sort through large shipments trying to identify what CPB is looking for. All internationally shipped packages are already required by the Universal Postal Union to have certain information attached to them, including the sender, the recipient, description of the contents, weight, and value. The problem is that information is not electronic, and it's not transmitted in advance, so it's not useful to law enforcement. Essentially, it's useless. The UPU has indicated it will require member countries to place a barcode on every package starting in 2018. That's fine. However, the shipper is not required to load any electronic information on that barcode until 2020. Meanwhile, we have a crisis. Realistically, the target date to implement this requirement is closer to 2022, we're told, but there's no guarantee it will even happen by then. For 15 years, the Postal Service has been on notice of the need to collect advanced electronic data about its packages. We can't wait any longer. As Americans are dying every day from these poisonous drugs flowing into our country, we must act, and we've got to stop this fentanyl, carfentanil, other synthetics from coming in. The Postal Service is trying to use electronic information at JFK to help CPB identify these packages. It's a pilot program. Postal Service is providing electronic data to CPB for packages that weigh less than 4.4 pounds, so-called e-packets. Once the Postal Service shares the information, CPB uses the information to identify the packages it wants to inspect. Postal Service then locates and presents these selected packages for inspection. This is a step in the right direction, in my view. After nearly 15 years of not doing this, The results to date are lacking, however. In 2016, December of 2016, late last year, the Inspector General found the Postal Service failed to present all of the packages CPB selected for inspection, and a substantial number of e-packets lacked any advanced electronic data associated with it. I understand the Postal Service is starting to take steps to remedy this issue of presenting packages for inspection, and I look forward to hearing the details of that today. But without advanced electronic data, we'll continue to miss a significant portion of these packages. Further, the pilot program is only happening at one location. At the other 4 centers, the Postal Service is stuck sifting through millions of packages, like trying to find a needle in a haystack. We can't continue like this. We need the electronic data, and we need it now. We've been working on a bipartisan way to solve this problem. That's why we introduced legislation called the STOP Act. My co-author is here with us today, and she'll speak in a moment. It's aimed at providing advanced information the Postal Service should be providing for international mail. We've got 16 co-sponsors in the Senate, 8 Democrats, 8 Republicans. In the House, there's separate legislation, companion legislation, that has 128 bipartisan co-sponsors. Our focus today is getting input from this panel of witnesses so we have a clear understanding from all the key stakeholders as we move forward on this. Again, thank you all very much for being here. I thank my colleagues for being here. I'd now like to turn to the Ranking Member, Senator Carper.